So I think that should help also.
No, what I have done is this time I have made like in I went to the screen sharing entire screen I have chosen this time
Okay, sir.
instead of window entire screen so that it is coming out. So
Are
I
you
will use it.
are you comfortable doing that, sir?
Yes, madam, no problem.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Morning, Krishnan.
Good morning, ma'am.
How are you?
Fine, ma'am. How are you, ma'am?
Yes, all good. You have the regards from Priscilla ma'am and Padma ma'am. Padma ma'am told that she'll try joining.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes.
Priscilla ma'am also conveyed her wishes to you. She's on leave today, but then she'll try joining online.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
அப்புறம் வந்து பிரிஸ்லா மேம் வந்து சொல்ல சொன்னாங்க நீங்க கொஞ்சம் நிதானமா சொல்லணும் அப்படின்னு சொல்ல சொன்னாங்க. Disadvantage of coming as a guest speaker back to the alma mater is that you still have certain requirements to be fulfilled.
இல்ல மேம் அது கண்டிப்பா மேம் நான் எப்போதுமே ஸ்டூடெண்ட் தான் மேம்
Happy to have you, Krishnan. We'll just wait for like another 5 to maximum
Sure, ma'am.
8 minutes.
Sure.
We'll
No
start
problem.
off.
No
Okay?
problem. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Krishnan.
So hello and a very good morning to everyone. Welcome to PALS 8. Before we start, can I please request everyone to fill out the pre-registration form? We have put the link in the chat box below, and shortly we'll be projecting a presentation. So we'll be projecting a QR code also. So please make sure that is filled out. I would also like to mention that we will be projecting a pre-questionnaire form and a post-questionnaire form also at the end of the session. And only upon filling these two forms will we be giving the certificate. So kindly fill out, right now, kindly fill out the pre-questionnaire form. So, hello and a very good morning to everyone present here. My name is Dr. Nikita, and on behalf of the Department of Physiology, Sri Ramachandra Medical College and Research Institute, I extend a warm welcome to all of you for the Physiology Alumni Series, PALS 8. The series is a special initiative to commemorate the Silver Jubilee of the MD Physiology program at our institution, and it provides a wonderful platform for our alumni to reconnect, share their expertise, and inspire the next generation of physiologists. Before we start our lecture today, may I please request our Head of Department, Dr. Pratibha Ma'am, to say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure, along with Nikita, Fazila, and Bharadwaj, the team that has put up the show together, to welcome you all to PALS 8. Physiology Alumni Lecture Series has been really doing well with many of you asking us about the upcoming events, and I'm so happy that we have with us one of our wonderful alumni, Dr. S. Krishnan. Thank you, Krishnan, for accepting to be a part of PALS 8. Thank you, participants, for joining us. Nikita, could you move to the next slide, please? On this occasion, I also wanted to take the opportunity and invite you all for the signature event from the Department of Physiology, which happens year after year. This is the 4th time we are doing it completely on the virtual mode, known as Prepare 2025, Physiology Postgraduate Ramachandra Enrichment Program and Academic Review. So it is a national level rapid review course targeting the postgraduates, primarily targeting the postgraduates who are going to write their exams in the month of October. So the program schedule has been circulated in various platforms. We will share the details in the chat window by the end of the session also. This is to invite you to be a part of this series. If you're a first year, second year, or a final year postgraduate, young faculty, to be very honest, a few senior faculty have also registered because it gives a good opportunity to listen to a number of speakers across the country and on topics that are extremely relevant for postgraduates. We have sessions on practicals, hematology, amphibian, skeletal muscle and cardiovascular experiments and mammalian experiments. The most important charts from the exam point of view will be discussed. We are also opening the platform for pedagogy competitions and original research paper presentation competitions, both for postgraduates and faculty. So on behalf of the team Physiology, I would like to invite you all to register and actively participate in Prepare 2025. So not stealing the attention from Krishnan anymore. Thank you, Nikita, for the time given to me to talk about Prepare. Over to you again.
Thank you, ma'am. It is indeed an honor for me to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Dr. S. Krishnan, currently serving as Associate Professor in the Department of Physiology at AIIMS, Guwahati, Assam. Dr. Krishnan completed his MBBS from Pondicherry Institute of Medical Sciences, followed by MD and PhD in Physiology from Sri Ramachandra Medical College, Chennai, where he was the recipient of the Dr. Natarajan Gold Medal for his outstanding performance. He was also selected under the prestigious ICMR Talent Search Scheme for the integrated MD PhD program. Over the years, Dr. Krishnan has handled diverse teaching responsibilities for both undergraduates and postgraduate students and has contributed significantly to curriculum development, including the CBME initiative. With over a decade of teaching and research experience, Dr. Krishnan has specialized in occupational health, climate change physiology, cognition, and heat stress research. He has completed several funded research projects, currently leads an extramural project supported by the Department of Health Research, and has published extensively with over 25 research papers in reputed national and international journals. He has also been invited as a speaker at various conferences and as a reviewer for international journals, including the Lancet Planetary Health. Today, he will be speaking on a fascinating and highly relevant topic, high altitude physiology, exploring the unique challenges and adaptive mechanisms of the human body in extreme environments. Please join me in welcoming Dr. S. Krishnan to deliver his lecture. Sir, the floor is off to you now.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, right.
Clear.
Thank you, ma'am. At the outset, my sincere thanks to the administration and management of Ramachandra University for allowing my own alma mater, Department of Physiology, to organize this wonderful event to connect the physiologists across the country. And my sincere thanks to the head of the department, Muthu Pradeepa ma'am, for giving me an opportunity and considering me for this prestigious lecture series. So with this, let me start with the presentation. Is the slides are visible, ma'am?
Yes, sir, the slides are visible.
Okay, right. Thank you. So the topic given to me today is high altitude physiology. To introduce myself once again, I am Krishnan, Associate Professor in the Department of Physiology at AIIMS Guwahati. So why high altitude physiology? Why it is important for a physiologist where we are living in the earth around the sea level, but why we need to learn about the high altitude? What is the significance? Is there any relation, and are we going to achieve something, or are we going to change something? Yes, we do have a important role as a physiologist in the high altitude mechanism adaptation, the research especially, to take an understanding of how the body reacts to the various adverse condition. So the adverse conditions here I mentioned, high altitude itself is a adverse extreme condition where there will be changes in the pressure, changes in the oxygen, so changes in the temperature, changes in the partial pressure of oxygen saturation. All these are not considered to be the normal for a human body, and we all know that our human body function in a homeostatic manner. There is a constant internal environment is maintained. In case if there is a change in the external environment, that homeostasis, again the internal homeostasis also will get disturbed, and it will take time for the body to adapt to that particular changes in the external environment. Yes, maybe we are not exposed to the very high altitude or high altitude as per se to have a day-to-day problem. But there are few people who are residing in a regular manner in the high altitude whose body had adapted to the changes that has taken place due to the high altitude. There are various physiological mechanisms that has changed in these people to adapt to that particular situation. With this brief introduction, let me go into the topic per se for today. And these are the objectives. By the end of this lecture, the participant should be able to define the high altitude and classify its level, explain the environmental stressor associated with high altitude, describe the physiological changes occurring in different systems during the ascent to high altitude, and differentiate between the acute, subacute, and chronic effects of hypoxia, that is the health effects and physiological changes, how the change, what are the changes that are taking place. Recognize the clinical syndromes related to high altitude, such as the acute mountain sickness, high altitude cerebral edema, high altitude pulmonary edema, and a few points about acclimatization in gradual ascent and in high altitude natives, what will be the adaptation in those individuals, and few recent advances and translational application and the current research status in the globe about the high altitude. These are the some of the objectives that we are going to see in the subsequent slides. So to start with, I want to introduce the term high altitude. What is an high altitude? Elevation above the 1500-meter above the sea level, where the reduced barometric pressure causes the hypobaric hypoxia and physiological stress. Because of the reduced in the barometric pressure, that will lead to the hypoxia, decreased availability of oxygen, and these two combination will have a stress on the physiological mechanism or the pathways that deals with the day-to-day activities. For example, temperature regulation, the blood circulation, etc. All these are related to the homeostatic mechanism. When this is getting altered, then there should be an adaptation that is should be taking place inside the human body, and this acclimatization or adaptation will take few hours to few days for the individual to get accomplished with that high altitude changes. So, what is considered to be the high altitude? So, some papers are mentioning about the feet, and some are mentioning about the in meter, the high altitude classification. Meter into 3 will be considered to be the feet approximately. So, few slides I am using the meter, and few slides I have used the feet. So, this is for your reference. Altitude between 1500 to 3500 meter is considered to be the high altitude, and very high altitude approximately around 3500 to 5500 meter above the sea level, and extreme altitude more than 5500 meter above the sea level is considered to be the extreme altitude. So you can ask me, okay, high altitude, yes, we all agree, and there are less human beings who are living in the high altitude, and especially in the very high altitude and the extreme altitude, there are very quite a number of people, maybe less than 10, who will be going there and living there for trekking or to achieve a record, etc. So, do we need to know about this? Yes. Maybe if you ask this question some 15, 20 years back, my answer would be yes, we should know, but I don't think so. The human survival in this area are possible without any external support. But now, with the recent advances and recent technologies and recent innovation in the medical field, humans are also able to live in the high altitude for a particular duration. And in the subsequent slide, I will brief you about what all the tech innovations that are available. So high altitude directly affects the human physiology because of the reduced oxygen availability. That is the number one problem, and this oxygen availability combined with decreased barometric pressure, that is the number two problem, that challenges the respiratory system, cardiovascular system, because oxygen is essential for the survival of any tissues in the body, and cardiovascular system and respiratory system main function is to transport and carry the oxygen to the different parts of the body. So when there is a decrease in the pressure and the oxygen availability, The first and foremost system to get affected will be the respiratory and cardiovascular system. Of course, the CNS also will be getting affected, but this will be the first point of contact that will get affected. The hematological and the metabolic system also needs to be adapted, forcing the body for adaptation. So this is the need why we need to read about the high altitude physiology. So moving on to the next, what are the environmental stressors at the high altitude? Since I am working in the field of the environmental physiology for the quite some years, I thought that I will brief you about the list of parameters that may be a challenge for a human being to bear at the high altitude. So, what are those challenges? The first and foremost thing is the hypobaric hypoxia, that is the decrease in the barometric pressure. Because of that, that is leading to the hypoxia. So, 760 millimeter of mercury is the normal pressure at the sea level. So, when we ascend up, there will be decrease in the pressure. That will lead to the decrease availability, that will combine with the decrease availability of oxygen, partial pressure of oxygen also will get decreased. That may be the first and foremost environmental stressors. The second one will be the cold temperature. That may lead to the risk of hypothermia and frostbite in the individual, which again will impair the heat loss mechanisms from the human body as well as the heat gain mechanism. So that will lead to the alteration in the homeostatic mechanism. And as we all know, temperature is the main, temperature and pH are the two main system that needs to be maintained at the constant level for the any enzymatic activity or any cellular mechanism that has to taken place in the human body. If there is changes in these parameters, that is the temperature and pH, then definitely that homeostasis and the enzymatic mechanism will get altered. There will be low humidity. As a result, that may lead to the increase in water loss, that may lead to the dehydration. Then high solar radiation, especially the UV radiation, that may lead to the risk of sunburn and snow blindness can be there. Strong winds, so that may increase the heat loss and exposure to the risk of increased heat loss. The whole cold stress could be a gripping factor. And reduced nutritional availability. There is no specific foods or food grains that will be available in that extreme temperature. So that may lead to the decrease in appetite and increase energy demand. So basically, the BMR has to be maintained, and if there is sufficient food intake, then everything will be fine. But if the appetite is decreased, and we are also going to do uh, high work category, means climbing against the slope, so that may lead to the increase in the energy demands. All these environmental stressor will put a challenge to the physiological homeostatic mechanism. That will be a challenge for any human being to get adapted or to get acclimatized. So moving on to the before moving on to the next details, I thought I will tell about the few history and the fascinating facts about the high altitude, because recently it is gaining the attention of the high altitude. And in fact, AIIMS Rishikesh is having a dedicated unit of the high altitude physiology, and they are also into the collaboration with the army. They are doing studies with in collaboration with the Indian Army for the researchers as well as for the human being who are residing at the high altitude, and also providing necessary treatments to overcome this high altitude homeostatic alteration. So in the 16th century, as early as 16th century, the Spanish explorers in the Andes and noted that there could be a breathlessness, fatigue, headache with respect to the high altitude exposure. And in 1644, the Torselli demonstrated that the atmospheric pressure can be measured with the help of the mercury barometer. And he also demonstrated that there is a decrease in the barometric pressure when we ascend to the high altitude. And Robert Boyle described the effects of this reduced pressure on animals in the experimental setup in 18th century. And in the year 1878, Paul Burt, the considered to be the father of high altitude physiology, has published the work called as the La Pression Barometric, which is explaining in detail about the barometric changes that is taking place at the high altitude. And in 1900s, there is a revelation about the acute mountain sickness, high altitude pulmonary edema, high altitude cerebral edema. And during the World War II, the aviation medicine and the decompression research chamber advanced the altitude physiology. So they did a lot of exposures, and they did lot of during those times. Lot of research has happened for the decompression chamber during the war time. That gained more insights and more knowledge about the high altitude adaptation. And late in 1990s to 2000, coming to the discovery of the hypoxia induced factor, nitric oxide pathways, and gene adaptation, the epigenetic pathways for the adaptation of the high altitude among the human beings. And recently in 2020, there is a modern guidelines that was released. To be more precise, there is a Wilderness Medical Mountaineer Society, or the Medical Society, in 2024 have released the recent guidelines based in the Austin and Texas in USA, regarding the high altitude. What are the prophylactic management that needs to be taken, how the high altitude trekking has to be taken place, and what are the precautions and the remedial measures that has to be carried out by any individual who is going for the high altitude. That lead to the translational research in the treatment of COPD, ARDS, and also a few insights into the space medicine, which India is exploring recently. Recently, our proud Indian went to the space extension of the high altitude. It is way forward above the high altitude, but still, those physiological adaptation at least could help them to formulate some hypotheses or some guidelines in exploring further altitude into the space to the management and for the further survival mechanisms. And 1953, the first ascent of Everest by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. And in 1978, Messner and Peter was the first people to climb the Everest without an oxygen supply. And in 2010, Romerio, a 13-year-old, became the youngest Everest climber. And in 2013, Muira, 80 years old, has become the oldest Everest summiter. So there is a very young population also, as well as a very old population also, who has climbed the Everest. So that gives the idea that high altitude is not a remote specialty. It is one of the inclusive specialty, especially in the recent time. That is, you can see the time duration. It is around 2010 and 2013. So it has a wide knowledge and a wide understanding among the general public also, that high altitude physiology is one of the important concept, that the adaptation needs to be taken place before the trekking or the high altitude traveling. And the world's highest permanent settlement of the human being is located in Peru, which is 5,100 meter above the sea level. And world's highest international airport is located in Bolivia, which is 4,061 meter above the sea level. And I will not be completing my task without mentioning the Nobel Prize, if anything, awarded. In 2019, the Nobel Prize was awarded to Peter and his team for the discovery of the hypoxia inducible factor. Especially, that is important when we go to the subsequent slides. You may understand about the why that is telling to be more important. So they were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for the discovery of the hypoxia inducible factor. So with this, what is the change? What is the pressure change, or what is the difference with respect to the normal altitude and the high altitude? So you can see in this picture, so the barometric pressure will be keep on changing from 760 millimeter of mercury at the sea level, and if you ascend up, then it may be decrease. But the percentage saturation, if you see, it will remain constant. So scientists have identified the percentage composition of these gases, nitrogen, oxygen, remain constant, but with the pressure uh, and the altitude, there will be a changes that may lead to the decrease in the barometric pressure when there is an increase in the altitude. These two factors is considered to be the more important environmental stressor for the high altitude adaptation mechanism. And Combining with this, the hypoxia also plays a very important role in mainly causing the physiological problems. So the French physiologist Paul Bert first recognized that the harmful effects of the high altitude are caused by the low oxygen tension, which we have seen in the previous slides. What happens at the high altitude? First and foremost thing, there is a fall in the barometric pressure. You can see in the table at the at the sea level, the barometric pressure is around 760 millimeter of mercury. But when we ascend up, maybe around 10,000 feet, which is considered to be the very high altitude, the partial barometric pressure decreases to 523 millimeter of mercury. And still, when we ascend up, when the altitude increases, the barometric pressure keep on decreasing. The second problem is fall in the alveolar pressure. So at the sea level, the partial pressure of oxygen is around 104 millimeter of mercury, and when we ascend up at 10,000 feet, if you can see the difference, it comes down to 67 millimeter of mercury. And when we go up to 30,000 feet, the partial pressure of oxygen is as low as 18 millimeter of mercury. And along with that, there is a when the partial pressure of oxygen is decreased, when there is a decreased availability of oxygen, obviously the percentage saturation of oxygen also will get decreased. So at the sea level, approximately it is around 97 to 100 percentage is the percentage of oxygen saturation. But when we ascend up, the percentage of oxygen saturation, when we reach 25,000 feet, it comes down to 60 percentage, less than 60 percentage. And the last important environmental factor is fall in the temperature. So at the sea level, the temperature is around maintained around 35 degrees Celsius. Sorry. And when we ascend up, maybe around 10,000 feet, the temperature will be coming down to the zero. And further, each degree when we ascend up, the temperature will go in the negative side, so minus side. So around minus 22, minus 44, and minus 55 degree, approximately when we reach 20,000, 30,000, and 40,000 feet, respectively. So from these two slides, you can understand there are four important problems. One is the decrease in the barometric pressure. Other one is the decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen. Third one is the decrease in the percentage of oxygen saturation. And fourth one is the decrease in the temperature. So just to recall the homeostasis, if there is change in the one of the homeostatic mechanism, physiological mechanism, then it will be difficult for the body to get adapted. So imagine here there are four homeostatic mechanism that is getting altered. So altogether the body has to put an effort to come bring back to the normal range. So this is the graph I have taken from the Lancet paper. What happens at high altitude? You can see in the x-axis it is the barometric pressure in millimeter of mercury, and y-axis is the altitude. There are two more x-axis, one on the upper side and other lowermost side. In the lowermost side, it is the partial pressure of oxygen in the inspired air in millimeter of mercury, and in the upper x-axis, it is the air density in gram per liter. So if you see here at 760 millimeter of mercury, that is the atmospheric pressure at the sea level, where at the altitude of zero, that is at the sea level, the inspired air partial pressure is around 150 millimeter of mercury, and the air density is around 1.2 gram per liter. But when we ascend up, when the altitude increases, you can see there is a gradual decrease in the partial pressure. The red line indicates the barometric, sorry, not the partial pressure, the barometric pressure. The red line indicates the barometric pressure, and consistently, the other two parameters, one is the partial pressure of oxygen in the inspired air, and air density also keep on decreasing. So take an example of Mexico City, which is approximately located at the altitude of 2,200 meter. You can see the barometric pressure is around 600 millimeter of mercury, and the partial pressure of oxygen in the inspired air is around 110 or 105 millimeter of mercury. And if you see the air density, it is 1 gram per liter. As you see, there are many more examples. It is provided in the graph. The Bolivia city, the Mont Blanc, which is surrounding the France and Italy, and the topmost that has been explained in this graph is the Mount Everest. It is mainly located adjoining to the our India, the Nepal and the China, which is at around the height of 8,848 meter. If you see at that level, considered to be the very high altitude, uh, the more important thing is the decrease in the barometric pressure, which is around 220 millimeter of mercury when compared to the normal, which is around 760 millimeter of mercury. And the same, if you see the air density decreases, the percentage saturation of oxygen in the inspired air is getting decreased less than 50%. So I think from these slides you can understand the barometric pressure and inspired oxygen is the fall progressively at the altitude, leading to decrease in air density and hypoxic stress, which is a key challenge in the high altitude critical care and the space medicine. So what are the effects of hypoxia? It depends upon the three factors. One is the severity of exposure, other one is the rate of exposure, and third one is the duration of exposure. We will see one by one. So coming to the severity of hypoxia, you can see in this picture, which is mentioned in the feet with respect to the altitude at the sea level. When we are going on increasing, 5,000 feet to 11,000 feet is considered to be the high altitude. Somewhere above 8,000 feet, the altitude sickness can afflict the travelers. Up to that, with the help of some training, etc., there could not be any problem. But once this 8,000 feet is crossed, then the real problem or the real challenge is there. And the feet is around 11,500 to 18,000 is very high. From around 18,000 feet to 30,000, it is considered to be the extreme altitude. It is same like what I have discussed in the first slide, but the only difference is it is in the feet. So how high is that? That is explained, or I have mentioned orally. What are the effects of the high altitude? What can happen in the high altitude? So around 12,000 feet, as I mentioned in the previous slide, around 8,000 feet is the first problem that will be happening in the individual. The starting of the problem. Maybe below that also, maybe around 5,000 to 8,000 feet, you can take into an approximate range. And above 12,000 feet, you can see the mental symptoms appear that include the drowsiness, headache, loss of memory, lack of judgment, incoordination, irritability, insomnia, euphoria, mental and physical fatigue. This is because of the decrease in the cerebral circulation that is happening at that time that may lead to all these problems. And if you can see in this picture, around more than 1,600 feet, the sleep alteration, meter, the sleep alteration will start. And once we ascend up, maybe more than 5,500 meter, which is considered to be the extreme high altitude, the loss of consciousness, the cortical atrophy, and changes in the MRI will be reflected in this altitude in the brain. So at 18,000 feet, there can be twitching and seizures. 23,000 feet, the loss of consciousness. And if you stay at 15,000 feet for 1 hour, it decreases the mental proficiency by 50%. And if you stay for 18 hours, then the mental proficiency decreases to 20%. So some of the examples for the effects of hypoxia with respect to the rate of exposure, the sudden exposure, that is the sudden entry into the mines where the excess methane and the other gases are present. And imagine the sudden cutting of oxygen supply to the pilot or to the passenger flying at the high altitude, and aircraft loses the cabin pressure. I have read during the preparation of this, the aircraft pressure is maintained at the level of around 1,500 to 2,000 feet for maintaining the high altitude that effects, to prevent the high altitude effects. And there is an uh, oxygen supply will be provided if there is a need in the while we are traveling at the flying at the high altitude. And also an example of aircraft losses the cabin pressure. And gradual exposure example includes the lowlander or the mountaineers who climbs at the high altitude in the stages. And lifelong exposure can be the permanent residents who are residing at the high altitude. So moving on to the acclimatization. What is acclimatization? It is an adaptation or the adjustment in the human body to cope up with the ill effects of hypoxia or the altitude tolerance. So it may occur as early as 8 hours to several days, but some books have mentioned it may take days to start adaptation or acclimatization to start. But a few literatures have given that as early as 8 hours in a trained person, acclimatization or adaptation can start taking place. And maximum height upon which the adaptation occurs is the 18,000 feet. Sorry. Now, on the right side of the slide, I have projected a picture again taken from the Lancet. Here, I wanted to bring to the notice that our body has the inherent capacity of sensing the hypoxia with the help of in the two mechanism. One is the systemic level, and the other one is the cellular level. With the help of the two chemoreceptors, one is the central chemoreceptors, other is the peripheral chemoreceptor. Central chemoreceptors at the brain in the brainstem level in the respiratory center. The main triggering mechanism is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and in the peripheral chemoreceptor, sorry, and the peripheral chemoreceptor, which are present in the carotid body, where the partial pressure of oxygen plays a very important role. You can see over here, the graph is mentioned or depicted over here. What are the early responses and what are the late responses? The early response includes the hyperventilation and the increase in the heart rate, and the intermediate response includes the cerebral blood flow alteration, and the last response, that is the late response, includes the hemoconcentration. So all this mechanism, which we are going to see in the subsequent slides, will put an important effect in the acclimatization or the adaptation mechanism of the human body with respect to the homeostasis that helps the body to maintain or withstand the effects of high altitude. On the other side, the cellular mechanism will be taking place. The most important factor is the hypoxia inducible factor alpha. So I have mentioned two scenarios over here. One is the normoxia, other one is the hypoxia. So what is happening in the normoxia? The hypoxia inducible factor is degraded by the enzyme PHT, and finally, the protosomal degradation of this factor will be taken place. As a result, there will not be any effects of hypoxia. Whereas, if you see the high altitude, the enzymatic activity PHT will not be there. That may have a strong life for the hypoxia inducible factor. It means the hypoxia inducible factor alpha will become very stable. That will again interact with the inducible factor alpha 1 and 2. That will again bind with the hypoxia responsive element to causes certain changes in the human metabolic processes as well as the cellular mechanism. The hypoxia inducible factor 1 activity will causes increase in the glycolysis and metabolic reprogramming that may causes the changes at the cellular level, whereas the hypoxia inducible factor 2 activity will lead to the erythropoiesis, that is increase in the RBC production, and the other one is the vascular remodeling that may lead to the alteration in the vessel effects and the other mechanism. So now we will see one by one about what is happening at each level. If you see over here, each system, if you see over here, there is a constant and the response to the constant change to the high altitude with respect to the respiratory system. If you see over the picture on the right side, again taken from a paper from Lancet, as I discussed before, the first and foremost thing, the first and foremost thing that is happening here is the decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen that may again will lead to because of the hypobaric hypoxia will stimulate the ventilatory drive, and that may lead to the increase in the ventilatory activity that may lead to stimulation of the respiratory center in to be in simple, that may lead to the activation of the respiratory mechanism, the person may be able to hyperventilate, or the arousal mechanism that will causes the increase in the partial pressure of oxygen and decrease in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. This mechanism again will inhibit the ventilatory drive, that may lead to the apnea. This apnea again will causes the will causes the increase in the partial pressure of oxygen and decrease in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. And we all are aware about the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is the main stimulus for the respiratory center activity. So again, when there is an increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, that may lead to the ventilatory drive. So this alternate period of the breathing, that is the hyperventilation and apnea, to be mimicking in a simple term the clinical scenario as the kind stroke breathing, that is one of the important physiological adaptation that is taking place in the human body for the for the high altitude respiratory mechanism. So there case of increase in the pulmonary ventilation, there may be hypoxemia, peripheral chemoreceptors will get activated, increase in the respiratory center activity, that may lead to the hyperventilation, decrease in the PO2 and decrease PCO2, that will causes the decrease in the respiratory center activity. So all this mechanism will be keep on continuing, the cycle will continue till the adaptation is taken place. And if you see the increase lung capacity, lung volume, there will be increase in the diffusion capacity, increase in the lung volume, increase in the vital capacity, and minute volume ventilation. Coming to the blood, physiological changes in the gradual ascent in the blood. So we all know about that the hypoxia is the potent stimulus for the erythropoiesis to take place. So the erythropoietin secretion will start place and polycythemia begin within a day and significant within 7 to 9 days. Increase in the RBC production will be there. So this is the mechanism how the hypoxia stimulating the RBC production, erythropoietin release, increase in the bone marrow stimulation, which may lead to the increase in RBC, increase in hematocrit, increase in oxygen carrying capacity and the content. The hemoglobin may increase up to 15 gram to from 15 gram to 20 gram percentage, and the hematocrit concentration increases from 40 to 60% approximately, and blood volume increases from 20 to 30%. On the right side, again, I have explained, I wanted to explain with a picture from the recent publication from the Nature. Here it has mentioned what will happen in the immune mechanism in the blood as well as the other transcriptomics and the metabolomics changes that will be taking place as a result of the high altitude. So you can see over here on one side, when the altitude increases, the percentage saturation of the oxygen decreases. And if you see in the initial phase up to the 5,500 meter or up to the high altitude, till the stages is achieved, there will be a period of acclimatization or adaptation that will be taking place, decrease in the inflammatory response, and the body will try to balance the immune effector process and the inflammatory response process. The balance will be maintained. As a result, the acclimatization and the adaptation will be taking place. It will be under the control. But once the altitude increases above 5,500 meters, that comes the real problem for the blood cells as well as for the cellular mechanism. Both hypoxia and the oxidative stress will be the two important key problem that may lead to the increase in glycolysis, activation of the hypoxia inducible factor 1, and increase in the antioxidant activity. That both together will causes a important problem. And together along with this, there will be increase in the inflammatory response, monocytes, by the release of monocytes, and immune effector processes will be decreased. So the cytotoxic CD8 cells and the T cells along with the natural killer cells, the CD16s, will play an important role in the cascade of the inflammatory process, and that will lead to the transcriptomics process that may alter the cellular mechanism, and that will lead to the high ill effects of the high altitude in the human body. On the other side, if you see in the plasma, that is the metabolic mix, there will be increase in the fatty acid metabolism, and there is increase in the glutamine metabolism. All these things will lead to the increase in the glutamine, that may lead to the increased usage of the TCA cycle. So that will again add to the one of the challenges or one of the burden for the body to adapt to the high altitude. So what are the physiological changes that may takes in the cardiovascular system? Initially, if you see, the coronary blood flow will get the brain blood flow will get increased through the coronary blood flow that we have seen in the previous slide, also in the graph. There will to maintain to balance this, there will be decrease in the cutaneous and the splanchnic blood flow. So the heart rate increases and the cardiac output increases to up to 30% to balance this increase in the cerebral blood demands, and the BP also increases due to the activation of the sympathoadrenal axis by the hypoxia. But once the adaptation starts happening, the sympathetic nervous system get desensitized and the parasympathetic nervous system activity increases. That may lead to the restoration of the cardiac functions, cardiovascular function. So you can see over here in this picture, the hypoxia is the central problem over here that may lead to the alteration in the cardiac output, that is increase in the cardiac output. Again, the erythropoiesis, increase in the RBC, so that the increase in the oxygen supply can be achieved, and increase in the cerebral blood flow regulation that may take place, and neurovascular coupling at the blood-brain barrier that will take place along with the help of these neurons and the microglia, so that the vascular lumen is intact. That will help in the maintaining the cerebral blood flow without having any hampering. Here is the table I wanted to brief you, again taken from article from Nature. Here is the parameter that all getting that will be getting altered with respect to the acute hypoxia, prolonged hypoxia, and long-term altitude residence. So we will discuss initially about the acute hypoxia. The adrenergic system, the sympathetic nervous system will get activated. As a result, the heart rate is increased. The maximum heart rate still it will be stable, which will be at the controllable range. The cardiac output increases. The slow column will be maintained at the stable range. It will not be go beyond the limit. There will be increase in the right ventricular volume, increase in the systolic function, and the blood pressure also will be increased in parallel with that of the heart rate. There will be increase in the pulmonary artery pressure, increase in the cerebral blood flow that may lead to the increased blood supply to the brain, which can prevent the damage to the cerebral function. And renal circulation will be hampered. Initially, there is a decrease in the renal blood flow and increase in the diuresis mechanism that will take place to compensate this. And if you see the myocardial circulation, again the increased blood flow will be there because the heart has to pump at the faster rate to supply the more amount of blood flow to the brain. To the myocardial circulation will also get increased, and muscular circulation will also get increased because the movement of the individual is depending upon the skeletal muscle activity. So the skeletal muscle blood flow also will get increased to compensate the mechanism for the high altitude at the that is because of the acute hypoxia. Similarly, the prolonged hypoxia and the long-term high altitude effects of the hypoxia is also mentioned over here for your summary. That will whatever has been increased when the adaptation happens, it will come back to the normal level, and it may have a important effect in maintaining the homeostasis. Coming to the tissue level, there can be increase in the capillary density, increase in the oxidative enzyme activity, increase in number of mitochondria, and increase in the formation of new blood vessels. We have discussed in the previous slides in the respiratory system, sorry, in cardiovascular system, that helps in the angiogenesis and increase in the myoglobin content. All these will causes the effective utilization of the oxygen. And in case of the gastrointestinal system, which is the one of the main system to get adapted, because initially the sympathetic nervous system will be activated, but once the adaptation starts, once the acclimatization starts, the parasympathetic system will take an upper hand for the thing. Once the parasympathetic system takes an upper hand, that may lead to the altered in the GI function, that may lead to the loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, like more liquid food, dislike the solid food, pain in the abdomen, and that may lead to the intense thirst activity. Coming to the changes in the central nervous system, the cerebral hypoxia, it is the main important factor initially because of the decrease in the availability of oxygen, that is the partial pressure of oxygen will get decreased. So the neuron receives the less oxygen demand. that may lead to the increase in the cerebral blood flow, that is the vasodilation, because of the auto regulation that is taking place, which leads to the increase in the intracranial pressure. That all this will lead to the increase in the cerebral permeability, increase capillary permeability, and that may lead to the cerebral edema. So this is the main mechanism of the cerebral edema at the high altitude, which we will discuss in the subsequent slide. Will there be any changes in the neurotransmitters? Yes, there will be changes in the level that may lead to the decrease in the cognition, which is very important for an individual, the alertness of the individual, and mood changes will be taking place. So there could be anaerobic glycolysis and lactate accumulation will be there due to decreased availability of ATP, and disturbed sleep will be noted in this individual. And as we discussed in the previous slide, the periodic breathing is one of the typical feature of the these people who are trying to climb the high altitude. The symptoms may appear in a form of acute mountain sickness, which includes the headache, dizziness, fatigue, nausea, and the poor sleep. But once this problem is very acute, very severe, then it may lead to the two important complications. One is the high altitude pulmonary edema, and the other one is the high altitude severe edema. Since we are dealing with the CNS at this slide, so I have mentioned about the high altitude cerebral edema, which is a very severe form of the acute mountain sickness that will lead to the ataxia, confusion, drowsiness, and that may lead to the coma of the individual, loss of consciousness. So again, a picture taken from the Lancet. To see over here on the left side, you can see the partial pressure of oxygen. The very first blue you can see at the sea level, the partial pressure of oxygen at the inspired air around 150 millimeter of mercury. The next column is explaining about the altitude from 0 to around 8,000 to 9,000. And the third column is explaining about the severity of the altitude, whether it is high altitude, very high altitude, and extreme altitude. And fourth one is the gradual decompression, that is the what activity will lead to this from walking to then high altitude. If you see over here, and this picture is giving a rough idea about the approximate height with a prominent landmark, which includes the Kilimanjaro and the Mount Everest around 6,000 meter and the 9,000 meter. So if you start with at around 1,000 meter, if you see over here, again, if you can see the partial pressure of oxygen at the inspired air will be decreased, and commercial aircraft are pressurized to an altitude of around 1,500 to 1,000 to 2,500 meter. This I was explaining you in one of my previous slide. And in the case of high altitude, there could be a chance of acute mountain sickness and cerebral edema is possible. But if proper acclimatization and adaptation and remedial measures are taken, this can be avoided, or it can be overcome with that. And there could be a complex reaction time slows that may lead to the decrease in the decision making activity of the individual. And around the altitude of around 4,000 meter, the psychomotor impairment will be there, and learning and spatial memory will get impaired around 5,000 meter. And around 32% of the climbers have hallucination above the 7,500 meter height. And MRI changes also include the white matter hyperintensities and cortical atrophy above 7,000 meter. Memory retrieval also will get impaired around when the altitude increases to more than 6,000 meter. And on the right side, if you see acute decompression, that is from aircraft explosion, if you see around 7,000 meter, it can be a loss of consciousness. Around 4,000 meter, you can see the dizziness or the tinkling, and around 2,000 to 1,000 to 2,000 meter, you can see the altered night vision. So this slide explains you the summary of physiological changes at the high altitude, again taken from the one of the article from Nature. So that the high hypoxia that leads to the activation of various reflex loops and stabilization of the hypoxia inducible factor that may lead to the expression of the signaling proteins and affect the various systems that may have the important role in regulating the homeostasis. It starts from the chemoreceptor that include the central and peripheral chemoreceptors, that may lead to the cardiovascular system alteration, that is heart increase in the heart rate, and respiratory system increase in the respiratory pattern activity, that is the hyperventilation, which we have seen. With respect to the smooth muscle and the endothelial cell, that may lead to the vasoactivity, angiogenesis, and increased cell permeability, that may lead to the pulmonary vasoconstriction and the peripheral vasodilation, which helps in the maintaining of the blood flow in the particular system. And EPO, erythropoietin producing substances, the cell, the EPO, that will stimulate the bone marrow to produce more amount of RBC, that helps in the increase in the oxygen transport capacity of erythrocytes. The macrophages will lead helps in the systemic inflammation, will deals with the systemic inflammation. And type 2 pneumocyte, that is the alveolar hypophase, that may lead to the respiratory system activity, which includes the decreased sodium alveolarly absorption, that may again one of the important factor in regulating the homeostatic mechanism. And with respect to the kidney, we have seen about the increase in the diuresis, and that main mechanism that is involved over here is the RAS mechanism and antidiuretic hormone activation, and ANP activation also, that may lead to the maintaining of the homeostasis mechanism to prevent the effect, the pH changes. All those effects will be counteracted by these mechanisms. Now, having seen the effects of high altitude in various systems, in a gradual or just a casual climber, there are few people who are residing at the high altitude permanently. So, what will be the changes in those individuals? So, if you see the respiratory adaptation, there is increase in the resting ventilation. There is a chronic hyperventilation that is noted in this individual, and always an enlarged lung volumes, or because of that, the increased lung volumes is noted in this individual. The cardiovascular adaptation, which includes the normal or slightly increased pulmonary arterial pressure, better pulmonary vascular remodeling is noted in this individual, that may help in the efficient oxygen delivery. And hematological adaptation, that may include the moderate or increase in hemoglobin content and hematocrit, increase oxygen saturation at rest and exercise. So better oxygen unloading due to the altered hemoglobin oxygen affinity can be noted in this individual. So that is one of the main reason, and also recent advances they have mentioned that few important genes like EPAS1 and EGLN1 variants are noted in this individual, that is helpful in maintaining the better oxygen efficiency in the people who are living in the Tibetan plateau, that is noted as one of the high altitude permanent resident people are there. Coming to the cellular and the metabolic adaptation, there is increase in the capillary density, increase in the mitochondrial number and efficiency, and better glucose utilization is noted in this individual. So having seen about the high altitude, the physiology behind that, acclimatization, physiological changes that is taking place in the various systems. Now we are moving in the next chapter of the applied aspect, called as the acute mountain sickness. What will happen? What is that? So it is the health effect of high altitude caused by the rapid exposure to the low amount of oxygen. And why does it happen? Usually after gaining a feet of around 8,000 feet, height of around 8,000 feet, altitude, due to decreasing level of oxygen and dipping in the air pressure, this may happen. So what are the symptoms that include? That may include the heavy breathing, nausea, dizziness, hallucination, and headache. If you are giving the proper care treatment, if you are identifying the problem, and if you are giving the proper management, then it can be easily treated. But if it is untreated, the acute maintenance sickness is one of the main important precursor for the fatal condition of high altitude pulmonary edema and the high altitude cerebral edema. Now, what is this high altitude pulmonary edema? In a short form, usually it is called as HAPE. So, high altitude pulmonary edema is a life threatening lung condition that occurs when the fluid fills the air sacs of the lungs at high altitude, typically above 2500 meters. Around 8,000 feet, you can keep for approximately. Any of the two symptoms will be present. It may be dyspnea, trust, or the cough, or weakness, and the tightness of the chest. Along with any of the two signs, there can be a tachypnea, there can be tachycardia, There can be central cyanosis and rattling breath sounds. So if any of the two symptoms and any of the two signs are noted, immediately high altitude pulmonary edema should be suspected in these individuals. Here is the molecular mechanism of how the high altitude pulmonary edema happens. So if you see over here, decrease altitude at the decrease oxygen at the high altitude, that may lead to the decreased arterial oxygen, which causes increase in the sympathetic activity, increase in sympathetic activity on one side. On the other side, uneven pulmonary vasoconstriction will may happen. So both will causes the decrease in the venous return and as the and decrease in the lung volume, lung and the blood volume. That may lead to the increase in the capillary pressure. So because of the increase in the capillary pressure, there could be a chance of leakage of the capillaries that may lead to the high altitude pulmonary edema. On the other side, the hypoxia will lead to the activation of hypoxia inducible factor 1 alpha, that may lead to the again the reactive oxygen species. The cellular mechanism will get activated, that will causes the cytoskeletal disruption, loss of cell integrity, leading to the vascular leakage. So one side is because of the sympathetic activity and the altered pulmonary vasoconstriction. On the other side is because of the cytoskeletal disruption. Both together will causes the vascular leakage and the leakage in the capillaries, that may lead to the accumulation of the fluid in the air sacs, the high altitude, that may result in the high altitude pulmonary edema. The next important clinical thing is the high altitude cerebral edema. It is considered to be the fatal and the severe effect of the high altitude. The acute mountain sickness are also considered to be the end point of acute mountain sickness because of the vasodilation of the cerebral vessels, that may and changes in the mental status, dizziness and the loss of coordination. All this will be leading to the very fatal health condition. So here is the summary or the flow chart explaining about the pathway of high altitude cerebral edema. So there could be a hypoxia that may lead to the alteration in the mitochondrial succinate pathway. Again, activation of reactive oxygen species, that will lead to the blood-brain barrier failure. This will causes uncompensated elevation of the blood volume that we have discussed in the previous slide, which in turn will causes the increase in the intracranial pressure, that will causes high altitude cerebral edema. Also, the hypoxia inducible factor alpha, like the previous high altitude pulmonary edema, also plays a very important role, that may lead to the cellular cytoskeleton alteration, that may lead to the failure of the blood brain barrier mechanism, protective mechanism, that will continue the pathway of the uncompensated elevation of brain volume and lead to the high altitude cerebral edema. So coming to the chronic mountain sickness or the Monge's disease, if you see the partial pressure of oxygen around 45 millimeter of mercury and the percentage saturation of 81 percentage and hemoglobin of 15 to 19 milligram percentage is noted in this individual. Hypoxia, because of this hypoxia, there is increase in the packed cell volume, that may causes increase in the viscosity, decrease in the blood flow, tissue blood flow, which in turn will causes the decrease in the oxygen delivery. And because of hypoxia, again the PCV will increases. There will be increase in the pulmonary artery pressure. There could be a right ventricular hypertrophy, that may lead to the decreased systemic blood pressure, congestive cardiac failure, that may lead to the death of the individual. One more effect, the hypoxia may lead to the pulmonary vasoconstriction, that may lead to the increase in the pulmonary arterial hypertension. There can be fatigue, decreased exercise tolerance, severe hypoxemia, excessive polycythemia, hypervolemia, pulmonary artery hypertension, right ventricular hypertrophy, and heart failure are all the some of the features that can be noted in these chronic mountain sickness or in the Monge's disease. So with this background, basic physiology, whatever we have discussed, I wanted to highlight about the research status of the high altitude uh, across the globe. So this is taken from the Journal of Physiology from the European Physiological Society. where they have highlighted, where they have published a paper, physiology research at high altitude from 1970 to 2020, around 50 years. What was the research that has been conducted at in high altitude and where it was conducted? So from the map, I have depicted the means they have depicted the map of the countries who are consistently working in the high altitude research, and we can see and proud that India is one of the country who is working in the high altitude physiology research quite a number of years, and almost 83 percentage of the publication took place in the 7 countries, that is including India, and that is representing the 35 percentage of the high altitude population. Overall 35 percentage of the high altitude population has been covered in this 83 percentage of publications that is took place in the high altitude, and India is one of the major contributor for the high altitude research. So if you see the participants who are there, mostly the male and mostly the journals who are there participating, who are there good climbing or trekking are main participants over there. And what are the gaps and cross population consolation? If you see the gaps, diversify the population that are studied. There are less number of population that are studied, means only the mountaineers or the trained people who are there, who have got acclimatized, who have got adapted or included in the study. Then one way it is acceptable to avoid the ethical complication, but it will not be giving a generalized or it cannot be extrapolated to the general public. So work with geographically underrepresented population and the researchers, and promote and prioritize the female inclusion also. Many of the studies have included only the male because maybe according to this article they have mentioned frequent people who are trekking with proportion is male when compared to that of the female. That may be one of the reason for including the only the male. And study factors beyond hypoxia that influence high altitude physiology also should be considered for the future research, which includes the urban versus rural lifestyles. So people living in the urban versus the rural lifestyle, how they are getting adapted to the high altitude, and how is the changes, physiological changes between the urban and the rural population in the high altitude. With respect to physical activity, moderate physical activity, sedentary activity, whether if there can be any changes with respect to the diet, with respect to the air quality, with respect to the pathogen exposure, with respect to the seasonal migration, all these could be considered in the future research aspect for the impacts of the high altitude on the human health. And also they have suggested engage in the equitable research practices that include the reciprocity, community centered approach, and end the helicopter research. Like without understanding what is the main problem in that area, without going to the field, like just on that day going into the particular area and on that day collecting the data and giving the results and giving a conclusion is considered to be the helicopter research, which is considered to be the one of the not considered to be one of the good practice in the research. So that needs to be avoided in case of the any research, and particularly with respect to the high altitude research. These are the some of the research thing I wanted to highlight over here. And coming to the recent advances in the last 10 years, whatever has happened. So because of the availability of the modern resources, the techniques, the machines, and collaboration with the foreign universities, and collaboration with the between the states, there are many discoveries that have happened in the last 15-20 years with respect to the high altitude. So I will start with the genomics. I have also explained in the previous slides of the permanent residents at the high altitude. With respect to the genomics, they have identified EPAS1 and EGLN1, which is the variants linked to the Tibetan low hemoglobin phenotype. Means these people will be having these genomic sequences or the hemoglobin phenotype that may have the better oxygen efficiencies. And the second reason advances is the epigenetic changes that triggers the DNA methylation and histone modification that may lead to the fine tuning of the gene expression for adaptation rather than changing the entire gene sequencing. So epigenetic mechanism are also noted in these high altitude people, high altitude humans, so that can give you a conclusion, or it can give you a proof that even the epigenetic modification is sufficient for the adaptation at the high altitude. And there is a increase in sensitivity of the high altitude mountain sickness prediction by using the new models, using the ascent rate, integrating the ascent rate, the partial pressure of oxygen, demographic of the individual, and symptoms that are present in the individual, that may help in the improved risk prediction, so that with this the more acclimatization and training can be given to this individual, and also helpful in choosing the individual who are going for the high altitude. And recently in 2024, updated guidelines by the CDC US and Mountain Medical Sciences have recommended the prophylactic management of acetozolamide for the high altitude adaptation, as well as the staged ascent to prevent the acute mountain sickness impact. And the recent evolving field, the gut brain axis, also have found to be an important role, that is the microbiome shift and the barrier dysfunction tied to the high altitude illness. The results are ongoing. So they have mentioned, like in the recent studies, that there is a barrier dysfunction is linked to the acute mountain sickness and other altitude illnesses. And recent experimental therapies is going on, that is the stem cell based approaches, which are under the preclinical trial, which are given for the interventions, that is the stem cell based interventions are given to those individual as a precautionary measure to adapt to the high altitude as one of the adaptation mechanism. So to summarize, the high altitude is considered to be anything more than 1,500 meter or anything about 5,000 feet is considered to be the high altitude, and hypobaric hypoxia is the main problem in case of the high altitude. And various environmental stressors we have discussed. One is the low partial pressure of oxygen, cold, low humidity, ultraviolet radiation, wind impact, that is the strong winds, poor nutrition, and difficult terrain or some of the environmental stressor. The physiological effects will depends on the severity of the exposure, rate of exposure, and the duration of exposure. And we saw about the systemic changes, physiological changes in various systems with respect to the respiratory system, the hyperventilation, cardiovascular system, initial increase in the cardiac output and the heart rate, and later getting adapted, and the blood polycythemia, increase in hemoglobin for the increased oxygen delivery to the tissue, and CNS because of hypoxia, it may lead to the increase in the cerebral circulation initially, and in acute case, in most severe cases, it may lead to the high altitude cerebral edema. And acclimatization, the gradual ascent and genetic natives of the high altitude residents shows the genetic plus the physiological adaptation that has been proved by the genomic study, which we have told in our presentation. And wide range of clinical symptoms are there. To name few are the acute mountain sickness, the high altitude pulmonary edema, and the cerebral edema. And the last is the chronic mountain sickness or the Monge's disease, which we have discussed. And few recent advances, which includes the microbial research, the epigenetic adaptation, and the acute mountain sickness prediction model, and also the stem cell based intervention therapies, which is under the preclinical trial, has marked an important milestone in the recent advances. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
First of all, a big thank you to our esteemed speaker, Dr. S. Krishnan, for such an enriching and insightful lecture. Also, a gentle reminder, the post-test and feedback form link has been shared in the chat box. Kindly fill within next 30 minutes in order to receive your e-certificate. The discussion is now open and participants may post their questions in the chat box.
The first slide is seen there. Quickly. And then you choose first slide. Those who have questions can unmute yourself and ask the questions, or you can put it in the chat window so that Dr. Krishnan can answer them. You can share your comments also on the chat window, please.
Postgraduates who are there in this session, if anyone, it is one of the favorite questions of the examiner, the high altitude physiology, and can be asked in the main paper also as well as in the recent advances section also. So you can prepare accordingly. Whatever I have presented, the reference is from the standard textbooks of Gyanang and Gaitan, and along with that I have referred a few articles from the Lancet, Nature, and the standard association, the Mountaineers Society, Wilderness Medical Society, which is mainly involved in the dealing of the extreme events, and one of the extreme event is high altitude. These are the standard references I have taken, and it is available in the open access forum in the Google. You can have a look into that. I can share the slide also. There is nothing in that. I can share with the organizers. They can share if there is a need.
Sure, Krishnan, and also the lecture has been video recorded.
Yes, ma'am.
Which we will be uploading it in YouTube. We faced a very odd situation today where the upper limit of the participants got stalled at 100, and there were about another 10 plus people trying to join.
Okay.
So I'm sure a few of them are disappointed. We apologize for the inconvenience, and we will, it takes usually a day or two. So for us to, put it up on YouTube. So we will be doing that shortly. They can refer to the video at any point of time. All the PALS lectures are also available on YouTube for their long-term
Okay.
reference.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Krishnan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
We have just listened to a truly enlightening session on high altitude physiology. On behalf of the Department of Physiology, Ramachandra Medical College and Research Institute, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Dr. S. Krishnan, Associate Professor, AIIMS Guwahati, for delivering such an informative and inspiring lecture. Sir, your vast knowledge and clarity of presentation have deepened our understanding and sparked curiosity among our students and faculty. It is now my privilege to deliver the vote of thanks. At the outset, I would like to sincerely thank our respected head of the department, Dr. Muthupratipa, whose constant encouragement, guidance, and support have been the driving force behind organizing this alumni lecture series. Her motivation always inspires us to strive for excellence. I also extend my thanks to all the participants, our alumni, faculty members, and students for joining and making this session engaging and meaningful. A special note of appreciation goes to my fellow organizing team members, Dr. Nikita, Dr. Bharadwaj, and myself, Dr. Fazila, whose combined efforts ensure the smooth and successful conduct of today's program. Finally, I thank each one of you for your enthusiastic participation. With this, we bring PALS to a close and we look forward to meeting you all in the upcoming session. Thank you. Before we wrap up, just a few important announcements for the participants. E-certificates will be provided to all registered participants only on the completion of pre-test, post-test, and feedback form. Post-test and feedback form link is posted in the chat box. Kindly fill the same. Stay tuned for the upcoming PALS lecture. And may I ask everyone, can you may I ask everyone to switch on the video? for a group photo.
I think we should stop sharing the presentation. Only then the screen becomes full of the tiles. Yeah. Fazila screen I have to unpin, I guess. Okay. Don't worry, I'm trying to fix the tiles, so not a problem. Give me a minute, yeah. PGs, if you're not in one, I know, yeah, lovely to see the PGs, thank you. Special thanks to all of you because you all logged out of your individual devices and came in as one group so that many can join. As mentioned earlier, we didn't expect this upper limit issue. This is cropped up for the first time. We'll solve it for the next time. Requesting all of you to please turn on your videos. Sampurna, Pradeep, Kalai, Nitya, Saroj, Ritu, Yogesh sir, and many, many others. Okay, so smile please. Let me take a screenshot. Somebody wants to join us now. Okay. Smile again once more, please. 6 others, yeah. We've replaced it. Organizers, Nikita, Fazila, can I, can we leave the call in a few minutes? Is it okay? All done from our side?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you once
Thank
again.
you all to those who joined. Go ahead,
Thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you, Krishnan. Thank you, participants.
Thank you, ma'am.